Hello everyone, myself Harmeet Sani, Register Migration Agent CECA Melbourne office. Today I am here to discuss the skill assessment process, what the skill assessment is, why it is mandatory, uh, how it is conducted, what are the various steps involved while we're doing for the skill assessment, and what are the various assessing authorities and the criteria of various assessing authorities. So all these things we will discuss in today's webinar. So let's start with the skill assessment process, what the skill assessment is. So basically, skill assessment is conducted by various independent authorities. These independent authorities are authorized by the Department of Home Affairs, and these authorities evaluate your qualifications, skills, and work experience. They confirm eligibility for your nominated occupation in Australia, and this skill assessment is quite mandatory for most of skill categories, GSM visas. For example, 189 visa, 190, 491, or even if you're going for employer sponsored visas, 186 and 482 uh, in some cases. All other visas, it is quite mandatory. Uh, but for 482, it is mandatory for certain passport holders and the qualification where you obtain. So location of your qualification. So it depends upon some other criteria as well. Uh, so how mandatory it is, like if it get positive, then only then you'll be eligible to apply for the expression of interest or another visas within Australia. But it if it becomes negative, in that case, you only option you have to go for the review of that application with the same assessing authority, and or you can submit the new application with the further documentations. So skill assessment is required because it is a legal requirement according to Australian migration law. So it is mandatory for our general skill migration visas under migration regulations. It confirms your skill experience that meets the Australian standards. And also, if you're going to claim points for your work experience, um, for your qualifications, then again, it is mandatory. And secondly, when you're going for any employer sponsored visas, so employer trust skill assessments when sponsoring workers, either through labor agreement stream or either to general skill in demand visa streams, and often linked the skill assessment with the registration and licensing, for example, for nurses, trade occupations, and engineer Australias. And it is very important to conduct your skill assessment right out time before you applying for your visas, because if you delay in the skill assessment, which is one of the mandatory part of some skills visas, so it will push back your entire migration timeline. So now we know that how important these skill assessments are, and uh, how to go, because without this skill assessment you are not eligible to apply with certain visa subclasses. For example, so who need the skill assessment? So as I discussed, all general skill migration point tested visas like 189, 190, 491. So these are skill independent, skill nominated, and skill work regional provisional visas respectively. Also, some employer sponsored visas like 482, 186, especially in the direct entry stream. So, and for Australian permanent residency for these visas, it is the mandatory requirement. You always have to go ahead with the skill assessment. So there are various skill assessing authorities available. It depends upon your occupation. Each occupations have their own assessing authorities. There are some examples on the screen you can see. For example, ACS, NMAC, CPA, IPA, CNZ, IML, TRA, VETSS, even AITSL, Engineer Australia, and many more. There are a lot of assessing authorities. Depends upon that your qualification and work experience, which HESCO code you are going for. Let's take some example with some of the assessing authorities. For example, ACS is quite popular, which is Australian Computer Society. It assesses ICT professionals such as software engineer, programmers, software developers, cybersecurity expert, and other IT professionals, ICT business analyst. So all these occupations are assessed by the Australian Computer Society. Another important assessing authority is NMAC, which is Australian Nursing and Midwifery Accreditation Council. It assesses Australian nurses and midwifery for migration and professional practice, or even the international nurses as well. So it depends upon the type of assessment they're going for. Similarly, CPA, CNZ, and IPA, these assessing authority assess accountants, general management, taxation, external, internal auditors, finance managers. So all these categories are assessed by the CPA against CPA, and CNZ and IPA against Australian standards. Another important authority is IML, Institute of Managers and Leaders. So it assesses senior management occupations such as HR managers, sales and marketing managers, general managers. So all these management level occupation are assessed by the IML. Another one of the most important category is TRA, which is Trade Recognition Australia. As the name suggests, so TRA, it usually conducts skill assessment for trade workers, for example, electrician, plumber, chef, carpenter, cook, mechanics, wall and floor tiler, bricklayer. So all sort of these trade occupation are assessed by the Trade Recognition Australia. And another important assessing authority is VETSS, which is Vocational Education and Training Assessment Service. So VETSS usually assess more than 300 occupations, which including business, education, social work, science, hospitality. So many more. So all these occupation, there are a lot of occupation which are assessed by the VETSS. So the reason for going through all this assessing authority is just giving you an example that there are so many different type of assessing authorities available according to the occupations you are going for to assess your qualification and work experience. And important thing is each assessing authority have their own requirements on criteria and documentation process. So I'm not going through to all of these assessing authorities at this time. So, but I'm going to give you the basic idea how these assessing authorities work. So, for example, if we talk about the English language requirements, English language requirements is mandatory for the skill visas, but not always mandatory for the skill assessment. I'm going to give you some example. For example, if you're going for ACS skill assessment, then it's not required your English language test during the assessment process. They assess your qualification and work experience. But if you go for Engineer Australia, or if you go for accountancy skill assessment, the assessing authority with CPA or IPA, or even CNZ. So their requirement is you have to have the English test ready to pass the skill assessment process. So similarly, there are a lot of other requirements that each assessing authorities have their own regulation and requirement to assess the uh, assessment applications. So let's go through the skill assessment process. So skill assessment basic process is same for most of the occupations. So all assessing authority usually follow the same steps. So let's go through one by one. So first of all, if you're looking for a skill assessment, uh, the first step is check your occupation and NGESCO code. So whatever skill assessing authorities, whatever your qualification, when you're going for a particular skill assessment as per your qualification and work experience, so you need to check your occupation first and the relative NGESCO code, Australian, New Zealand uh, skill skill category occupation. So uh, this is the standard which is adopted by Department of Home Affairs. Uh, the criteria is when you uh, select your occupation on the skill occupation list according to your work experience and your qualification. And next step is you have to find out the NGESCO code for that particular occupation, and your work experience must match with the guidelines provided by the NGESCO. So this is the first step. It is pretty common for all assessing authorities. And for the second step, now it is important. We have to assess the assessment criteria of that assessing authority. As I previously tell, some assessing authority have different criteria, like they require English language, they require some uh, organization chart and your CVs, everything, uh, and your work experience requirements. So all assessing authorities have various requirements, depends upon their criteria. So your education, which is a pretty common criteria for all the assessing authority, education must be relevant and equivalent to the Australian standard, and your work experience must reflect NGESCO duties and skill level described in the NGESCO list. You don't have to copy paste those requirements. You can add or subtract according to the list, whatever your job responsibilities are, but have to match with the guidelines provided by the NGESCO. And English language proficiency, it is required for by some authorities. You can either go for IELTS, PT, or another tests are also available now and accepted by the assessing authorities and Department of Home Affairs. And some other authority specific requirement, like I recently discussed, somebody demand structure, reference template, statutory declaration, or sometime need to pass additional exams. Uh, Exams in the terms like because you already qualified, but some assessing authority require if you are overseas qualified. For example, for nurses, if you overseas qualified and going for the skill assessment with NMAC, then the requirement is you must pass the NCLEX or ski exams before getting the skill assessment done. And third step, when you select your occupations, and also then you review your education work experience align, the next step is prepare the documentations. So all entire you need to provide your certificates, transcripts, completion letters of your qualification to the assessing authorities. Employment reference letter must be detailed, signed, dated, and must be on the company letterhead. Employment documentations like provide pay slips, tax documents, need to provide the employment contracts, and also having the job descriptions from the employer reference letter, and your CV, of course. And if any documentation, especially for the overseas qualified peoples, any documentation which are not in English, they must be translated, and translation must be through the notice certified professionals. And one more important thing is some assessing authority have very strict guidelines that whatever documents you send them, they have to be scanned on a particular uh, DPI level. Their clarity must be represented. For example, some 1330 says your documents must be scanned under 300 DPI or under 150 DPI. So they have to be scanned according to the guidelines of the assessing authorities. And the next phase is when you meet everything. So last phase is, of course, pay the assessing authority fees. And when you're going to apply collecting all these documents, so apply the application on the assessing authorities portal and pay their assessing authority fee. So different assessing authority have different level of fees, usually from about 500 Australian dollar to 12 to 1400 Australian dollars. So the most expensive is the ACS skill assessment, which cost for journal skill migration about $1,400, and even TRA, when you're going for the job ready program, they're also quite expensive. And after application, you will receive the acknowledgement letter, and it takes about somewhere 2 to 3 months to get the outcome done, depending upon the assessing authorities or case by case basis. Now, when you lodge your application, you're waiting for the application. The last thing is when you got your outcome. So if your outcome is positive, it means you're eligible to apply for the journal skill migration visas. But in any case, if it is negative, so it is not assessed as per the guidelines, and they give the negative outcome of your application, in that case you still have the option that you again can go for the review of that application. And but if you're going for the review, definitely you need to support your application with some additional documentation, so that you can prove your eligibility for that occupation. Otherwise, reassess or alternative, but related occupations have to be you have to pay for the extra fee if you're going for the review for that application. Otherwise, the another alternative is, for example, if you not meeting the employment criteria, you have to wait for a while. When you meet the employment eligibility, you can lodge the application again. So timeline and cost. So all assessing authority have different timelines and different costs associated with the applications. So I'm not going through the fee structure at this time, and it is not quite it is not at the same what the assessing authority fees are at the moment, because every year from July onwards, assessing authority fees are increased according to the CPI. So, but yeah, you can take the idea of this fee structure and timeline provided on the screens. Now, this is all about the assessment process, different assessing authorities and how they conduct the assessment, how mandatory the skill assessment process is. At the end, I just want to discuss some employment reference letter, which is quite important when you go for any skill assessment criteria. So when you get any reference letter from your employer, so it have to include a lot of information on it, and assessing authorities are really looking for these information when they're going to assess the application. The main things they're looking for are your Employment reference letter must be on the company letterhead and it must include employer name, address, and logo, applicant name, of course, and date of issue. There must be exact start and end date. For example, if you started from 7th of March 2020, so the date must be from 7th of March 2020, not like that March 2020. So exact start and end date must reflect on the employment reference letter. So similarly, how much salary you are getting, what other benefits you are getting, and how many hours per week you are working, everything must be mentioned on the reference letter. Your uh, position title and job responsibilities and location of your work, everything must be described on the reference letter by the employer. And last most important thing is who your employer reference letter must be signed by the HR or the owner of the company, and the email address, contact number must be there on the reference letter, whoever signed that letter. So these are very important things when assessing authority assess those informations. So, and it is pretty common for all assessing authorities. So different assessing, there are a lot more different assessing authorities. And telling I'm not going through all these assessing authorities at the moment, but if you need more information regarding the skill assessment criteria, what NGESCO code you have to go for, what is your according to your qualification or your employment experience. So for more information, please you do contact our nearest office. Our offices are located all around Australia, including Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, Brisbane, Perth. Our contact number are displayed on the screen. So please do contact if you have any inquiry regarding your skill assessment process. So this is all about for this webinar. In the next session, we will again come to discuss some other important criteria. So please note our numbers and please do contact if you have any inquiries regarding today's webinar or skill assessment process. Thank you very much at the moment. Shabak hai.